Welcome to When Technology Goes Wrong. I'm your host, Paddy Dhanda, and I have the privilege of heading up the product discovery and agile practices here at QA. In every episode, we take a deep dive into a technology failure, figure out what's happened, and the big lessons we can learn from it. Joining me today is James Stanger, who is Chief Technology Evangelist at CompTIA. James is a globally recognized expert in cybersecurity, open source, and workforce development. Today, we'll explore how the tech industry's skills gap is creating vulnerabilities that no firewall can fix, and why investing in people is just as critical as investing in technology. This episode explores the human side of cybersecurity failure, from under-trained help desk staff to struggles in engineering. James will unpack how skills gaps, poor culture, and neglected frontline roles can contribute to major breaches, and what organizations can do to build a more resilient workforce. James, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here, Paddy. Thank you very much.
James.
And thanks for the intro. There's lots of things to talk about, man.
Oh, you've got all these accolades. And I was also checking out your profile. You've written books. You're a public speaker. Yeah, phenomenal background.
I've done a few things that some of them have worked out. So, yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. I'll tell you what struck me most when I checked your LinkedIn profile. And I saw this picture in the background of like a canoe on top of a car. What's the story behind that?
I call that the kayaking safari truck. It's an old Toyota Land Cruiser, 1975. So it just had its, what is that? It's its 50th year anniversary this year. And so I'd like to get out, and I like to use that thing because it's always fun to go kayaking or scuba diving where no one has ever gone before, kind of thing. So it's kind of fun.
And is that your thinking time? Is that where all the great ideas come?
It certainly allows me to think things through, yeah. And it's fun too because I like working on the car itself. It's old enough to where you can actually do that yourself rather than have to take it to a dealer or something like that. You know, right to repair is always fun, right? So,
fantastic. And look, I'd love to find out about our guests right at the start of the show in terms of their background. So could you tell us a bit about your journey and your current role at CompTIA?
Sure. I'm Chief Technology Evangelist at CompTIA, and my journey, I suppose it started when I was a kid, when my parents walked in, and I think that it was the stereo, the family stereo was in the living room, and it had been dismantled, and all the pieces had been put all around the room because I wanted to see what made the thing work. And that wasn't the first time. So they got me my own stereo and I took it apart. So I've always been interested in, okay, there's this technology here. How does it work? And I think the big transition that I had was I had moved away from the tech scene and wanted to become, the idea was that I really enjoyed English literature and writing and things like that, which is a form of technology. Technology comes from I think it's an Indo-European word. What is it? Texos. In other words, to weave things. So any technology, whether it be cybersecurity or the cloud or writing, involves a technology. And so I've always been interested in that. But anyway, I remember Sandy, my wife, and I had 2 3/4 kids at one point when I was finishing up my doctorate. And I realized I needed to kind of pay for them. The bills kept coming in.
I feel you on that one for sure.
They're kind of inexorable and they keep showing up. And so I moved back into the tech scene. And I was already on a dissertation fellowship. And in that time, I had become kind of the de facto tech support person to all the professors. Hey, James, I'm running a problem with this printer, or I'm having an issue with this. And so I kind of parlayed that to get back into the tech scene. And so I started walking into the server room at the university, and I got a job as a technical editor. And so I just kind of got back into the technical side of things. And the big thing I found, sorry, too many details here, but as I was a technical editor, there was this concept that the book or the course that we were creating was trying to explain zero-based counting. You know how we start at 1, but computers start at 0?
Yeah.
And the description was technically accurate, but it was making me fall asleep. And so I said, hey, let me rewrite that a little bit. And they said, James, you need to become a writer rather than an editor of this. And then after a while, they said, well, James, why don't you go help the server people do this? And so I always have had the last 30 years one leg in the education side of things, but also one leg in the technical side of things, making stuff happen, actually doing this stuff. So that's why I think I was at CompTIA, I was managing products. And they said, James, managing products is one thing that you sort of do okay, but we like your ability to really get out and talk to partners and talk to individual leaders in governments around the world and to talk to leaders of enterprise about some of their problems and some of the solutions. And they said, why don't you go ahead and do that? And I said, okay, fine. So there's a little history of it.
And here you are.
And here we are. It's great to be back in London. Always. It's a great place to be.
And where are you from back in the States?
Seattle, Washington. I tell people I live in Washington State, but then they think I live in Washington, D.C. But I live on the West Coast.
Seattle's where Starbucks?
Yes, Starbucks started. Starbucks and AWS and Microsoft and all that fun stuff.
Oh, nice.
We like to call ourselves the Silicon Forest. So, Silicon Valley's down in California. We're the Silicon Forest. So there you go.
Oh, I love that. And look, cybersecurity skills.
Yeah.
Important in today's world and the current age of AI. How serious is the cybersecurity skills crisis right now?
I remember asking this about a year ago to somebody who lives here over in Reading, actually, here in the London area. And I remember the phrase he used was open dumpster fire. That was like, holy cow, that's a little dire. But I see what he's saying, because when it comes to the cybersecurity side of things, you have basically a lot of complex situations. So there's no easy button to get out of these complex situations. One of them is you have very motivated attackers, whether it be ideologically, nation state, gangster type of things. And by gangster, I don't mean, what's the password kind of 1930s gangster. I mean people who are in organized crime and very sophisticated outfits. They have HR departments, they have incentives. So there are all these attackers. But you also have organizations that, frankly, I'll put it this way. There are some organizations that still they don't realize it, but they kind of cut corners. And so they end up shooting themselves in the foot, in a sense, or inviting attacks. Let's put it that way. So you have also technology moving faster than ever before. It's ubiquitous. And it's, I say, inexorable. Inexorable meaning it's always going to be with us. It can't be avoided. And that's always morphing. It's always changing. So you have all of these elements all working together in fun ways. And then you have pressure. Like, it used to be tech was a nice to have, or, yeah, we have to have it, but it's not really central to the strategic business. Well, now it is. And so you have all these different factors kind of swirling together, and that leads to a lot of cybersecurity issues, frankly.
Yeah, and I have a daughter who's just left high school, and she's thinking about her path forward now. And as a good dad, I've been giving her some inspiration about possible careers that she could go into. I have to tell you, I've failed miserably at convincing her to go into cybersecurity, and I'm just not selling it in the right way. So if someone out there is thinking about a career change or even sort of moving into cyber, how would you sell it? Like, what is so great about cybersecurity?
It's problem solving. It's really, and it's also fun because there's so many new technologies that you can implement. You can use AI now that automates certain things that frankly took a lot of bodies to do, and it made it impossible to do. So people didn't do it. Now with AI, that barrier has lowered. So there have been forces that have been going on in the last 300 years, probably more. Things having to do with automation and miniaturization and a lot of shuns. Democratization, stuff that was unavailable 30 years ago is now available to us. Imagine cybersecurity is a nexus of all of these different things that have been going around for centuries, from automation to all of these different elements. And with cybersecurity, you can actually make that work, and you can solve industry problems. And you aren't just sitting in a basement usually doing this stuff either. You're rubbing elbows with fellow creative people, people who may not know security as security. They're going to be business leaders, but you're going to learn so much. So if you're constantly interested in constantly learning, if you're interested in solving problems and working with cutting edge technology, these are fun things. So those are the good sides of working on the cybersecurity side of things.
Any bad things?
It always has to be done yesterday. You don't have the budget available to you that you wish. usually. But usually the positive side, there can be burnout that can happen, but that can happen with any job. And what you do is you basically work for an organization that fundamentally wants to solve the problem. If you discover that the organization doesn't want to solve the problem, then you're going to start bashing your head against certain things. And that's a signal that it might be time to go elsewhere. I'm not saying it's easy to do that, but it's something that from a cybersecurity perspective, you can affect change and far above your punching power, as it were. In other words, you can actually, if you're able to show empathy with people and listen to them and communicate well with them, communicate technical concepts and things in a non-technical way, you can actually affect a change that's much bigger than yourself. And that's a heck of an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I'd never really thought about that creative side before, because my daughter is very creative. She loves sort of creativity, art, and all of that good stuff. Loves problem solving. So it's kind of music to my ears, actually, what you were talking about there.
Well, it's so cool because too many times you're like, oh well, you'll stop hacker life cycles, which actually is fun too, or you'll work with this piece of software. But it sounds like too many times people end up thinking in terms of, well, I had to have to get a 4-year degree and become a math genius in order to do this. I can't do that, or what have you. Actually, if you just have an interest in technology and how it works, and you just kind of want to get stuck in, you don't have to become a programmer genius or get a 17-year degree or whatever. You really don't have to do that. You have to be ready with unique skills, and getting those unique skills is tough. And I'll say one thing that's tougher is proving to people that you have that unique skill combination. That's even tougher today. But if you're able to kind of show cybersecurity at work, and if you're able to show that, hey, this person is poised, that your daughter's poised to help people solve a problem, then things will open up, opportunities will open up.
And what does a typical pathway look like for somebody who's gone into the profession? Are there sort of key stages that you work towards?
Yeah, good question. First of all, curiosity, interest level. Usually you started in a part of the IT profession, for example, tech support and things like that. That's one of the classic ways. You can even say cliched ways, I guess, that people start in the tech space. I didn't start that way. I started working in 1992, it was, working on databases on the internet. Now think about that. That's 3 years before Windows 95. So and we weren't even using HTML then. To work with databases. It was HTML to put the pages together, and then we worked with SQL and all that. So my start began in the liberal arts side of things, but right away it was the technical side that interested me, and I just started getting deeper and deeper into it. And at first I was asking all these silly questions. People are like, wow, you're really asking the big questions, aren't you? I'm like, well, I just got to figure this out. And then after a while, people start asking me questions like, hey, with this database, how do we do that? So one of the ways that people get started is the curiosity side of things. The second thing that they do is get a job that is related into cybersecurity. The third thing is they get some form of education, either informal or formal. And so when it comes to actually that journey that people take, oftentimes it's not as linear as people think. And certainly it wasn't back in the day when dinosaurs roamed the earth, in the 90s when I was getting started in earnest in that. Nowadays, the nice thing is that there are very linear and very good ways that make it possible to get past those barriers to entry. By barriers to entry, it's like, well, how do you get those foundations? I remember people mentioned MAC address. I didn't know what MAC address, what is that a Macintosh? What is a MAC address? And so it was the school of hard knocks. Nowadays, you've got organizations that are very much poised to help you learn that stuff in an easier way. And this is cool in one way. It allows you to get to those unique skills combinations easier. Now, the downside can be if it's all spoon-fed to you and you've never had any challenges, then it's like, oh, well, then that person just has memorized a few things and hasn't really understood how technology really works. But we have a solution for that, just hands-on exercises. We put people in virtual labs and we get them into ranges and figuring out, how to solve these things from a muscle memory perspective. Like you actually have to, okay, here's a problem, solve it. And instead of step by step, here's how you solve it. It's, well, here's some solutions. We've done a few step-by-step things. Now you get creative. And so that I think allows us these days with QA, with CompTIA, to really challenge people to create really unique skills combinations to solve these industry problems.
Yeah, I mean, I was at a event just the other week actually with one of our clients, and they had this amazing platform from again one of their partners, and it's all around sort of gamifying cyber. And the great thing about that platform actually was it sort of takes in your preferences. It's aimed at children actually, and it takes in some of your gaming preferences. So what games do you like playing, like Fortnite and Roblox and all of these good games that kids play these days? And it takes all of your sort of preferences, you answer a bunch of questions, and then it actually recommends the type of cyber role that you'd be suited to, which I thought was genius, because my son, who's actually 13, he's a bit younger than my daughter. I mean, he's an avid gamer, and I could definitely see him sort of really embracing something like that. Whereas I think traditionally cyber's been sold to us as being this kind of, like you say, you're in the basement and all you're ever doing is kind of typing away on your keyboard, and you hear this kind of perception of hackers in hoodies and all that kind of stuff. So it's quite interesting just hearing you talk there. Like I'm certainly interested, and I'd never really thought about a career in cyber.
It's really one of the things that from a cybersecurity perspective that happens is there are so many job roles out there. And to your point about with the gamification, organizations, we've done a really good job. I'm lucky enough to work for the research department at CompTIA, and we've identified that's about 35 job roles that, even though there are hundreds of listings, if you go to any of the job boards, you'll see hundreds of job listings and things, but we kind of boiled it down. And basically you can put together these profiles and job profiles, and people can start cross-learning, cross-training from one job role to the next. And I think that's one thing that is out there more, is that easier in a sense, is you can actually come up with a really good authoritative profile of the dozens of job roles that are out there that are in cybersecurity. Pen testing, for example, or security analyst, for example, or incident responder. At times organizations are so small, they can't afford to hire, a dozen people in a dozen job roles. They'll hire one person that wears lots of hats. But it's cool to get involved in this, because more than ever before, you are allowed to, it's possible to delve into these things and develop that muscle memory and develop those skills based on authoritative information. At CompTIA, we offer certifications in various job roles. Security analytics, for example, or next year, operational technology. We'll be doing one in cybersecurity for operational technology. And we publish those objectives. And those are created by thousands of working IT professionals, not just a couple of mad scientists, but thousands of working professionals. And it's so cool because, man, I wish I had that when I was young, because I could just go, oh, I know it's important and I know what's not important. If it ain't in here, then I don't need to learn it as much. And kind of a lousy way to put that, but it allows you to focus on things and really delve into it. And I told myself years ago, the next time I hear whatever acronym, whatever 3-letter or 10-letter acronym or whatever, I'm going to get into a virtual lab and make it work. Like use a piece of software that is based on that acronym so that I can see it in motion. And to me, that's what that helps people, I think, turn that from theory into practice.
And you mentioned right at the start about sort of some of these organizations are very sophisticated, these gangs are sort of doing this kind of malevolent hacking and all of that good stuff. Mm-hmm. Could you share some real world stories of where cybersecurity incidents can be traced back to a lack of human skills training?
It's a really good point. I think for example, one of the recent attacks that has gotten a lot of notice, it was August 2025. It was an attack involving Anthropic using agents. And there's basically a bunch of agents had been deployed, AI agents had been deployed, and they were able to attack about 17 different known companies with much more speed, with much more variety of attacks and depth of attacks. They were even tailoring it to say, well, Paddy, your company can afford a $500,000 ransom, but James's company is smaller. It can only afford a $10,000 ransom. So it would actually tailor its attacks accordingly. It's pretty sophisticated. Now, what does that have to do with end users and things like that? Well, somebody had to program those agents. And we as end users use agents increasingly to do work for us that's repetitive. So one of the things that is happening really is people are skipping the education side of how to create an agent securely and all that. And it creates a debt. It creates a problem. And as we stampede into a technology, we kind of skip steps because we got to be innovative. And if you skip steps along the way, each time you skip a step, it's like incurring a debt on your credit card. And it feels real good at the beginning of the month, but at the end of the month, it doesn't feel so good when you're like, I did that. And that's what organizations have chronically been doing all along. And one of those has been not properly educating their end users on these cutting edge technologies. The second thing that a lot of companies haven't been doing, many of them have, but a lot of companies have not been doing proper end user behavior analysis. The idea of saying, well, James works on the network every day. What's his behavior like? So you create a profile. And as soon as things fall too far out of profile, then it's like, well, maybe that's not James at that computer anymore. Maybe that's an agent that's taken over. So there's all sorts of end user perspective and IT worker from that perspective training that needs to happen when we're using those cutting edge technologies. So there's some thoughts.
That's really interesting because I come from the product world and I think about sort of personas, and we build these personas of sort of a typical user or a customer, and sounds like that's a similar sort of process there to say, for this type of job, what would you expect this person to do
That's right.
on a typical day, rather than what we're seeing at the moment, which could be, as you mentioned, an agent gone wrong or someone's hacked it in some way.
It's true. And I think what's happened with that attack, it's made people realize that we need to focus on that persona or focus on the end user. People use the term zero trust a lot. The zero trust meaning you don't trust anything. You don't trust the network. Remember back in the day when firewalls made it, oh, you're on the trusted network, so you're okay. Forget the fact that somebody who works next to us every day inside the network might be disgruntled or paid or whatever. So the idea is that with, I think, this attack, it's made people realize that as we use agents, we need to think in terms of the profile. And we need to realize that it's not necessarily one technology that will do it. It's increased monitoring and understanding, the persona or the expected behavior, and then understanding what anomalous behavior is. That's becoming much more clear now.
And help desk teams are often overlooked in cybersecurity strategy.
Sadly.
Yeah. Why do you think they're such a critical part of the frontline, and are they being underutilized? I
think a couple of things have been underutilized. The data that they work with and the data they generate has been underutilized. One reason why they are at the front, the edge, as it were, is because they work with end users every day. And so because they're with the end users and because attacks tend to focus on end users, social engineering, supply chain attacks, AI agents that are used by users, all of those things, it centers on the user. So it's only natural that the database created by the tech support workers, the knowledge base, whatever you want to call that, the ticket base, that's a huge resource. I was talking to a friend of mine who worked for Mandiant a while back. And as he worked for Mandiant, they did they declared a war. I think that's the term they used on malware. We're going to find every piece of malware. About 18 months later, they did a pretty good job of discovering it. They had gone through it 18 months. That's a long time, but they had very painstakingly looked at things. And one of the things they found was copiers that were networked together, hundreds of them in very sophisticated ways. They found that malware had been installed on all of them at a certain point about 2 years before, 3 years before moving forward. It took about 6 months for all the copiers to get hacked. And they were stealing data and sending it off to whatever evil nation state and all that. That was, classic case. And they were really happy they caught that until one person said, notice when that initial barrage of attacks, there were thousands of these copiers involved, printers, copiers involved. Notice when that started, there was a huge spike in the end user ticket request to the help desk. And they said, that was ignored. They didn't look at it that way. They were looking at it from the device perspective. The security people were looking at it from the device perspective. Like, oh yeah, look at that. There's this malware there. Look what we discovered. And they reconstituted it. And the person said, if we'd have taken a more data-driven look at things and looked at the help desk data, we would have seen these spikes of requests saying, hey, these copiers are acting funny. Because when the copiers started getting compromised, of course they acted funny. That happens a lot. And they're like, we would have discovered this thing right away. So there are whole data sources that are very rich and very suggestive. And if we just could find ways to use a little bit of automation, use the term AI if you want, if we could use a little bit of data analytics kind of skills, it would save on a lot of cycles. It wouldn't take 18 months, it'd take 18 weeks maybe.
So it sounds like if you love data and
Sure.
you're analytical,
I try to be.
then that's a really useful skill as a cybersecurity professional.
Big time, yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's amazing.
It's interesting. First time I was asked as a product manager, the boss then said, "Hey James, we need to create a pen testing cert." And so I went out and started asking a few of my friends about pen testing. And they're like, well, of course that's a big deal, James. But there's this new thing, this is years ago, about 10, 12 years ago. But there's this new idea. Back then they used the term big data. Remember that term?
Oh, yeah.
And they said, imagine big data plus security and mixing that together and kind of analyzing stuff. And I'm like, well, that's either the smartest thing or the dumbest thing I've heard in a long time. Turns out they were really smart. And so data is a really a big deal. It's something that is, I think, one of the things that changes the game. And cybersecurity has focused on data not only for security analytics and things like threat intelligence and user behavior modeling, but also we have to protect data. Because if data feeds AI, if it's the oil that feeds AI, the AI car, then that means we have to think of data in three different ways: at rest, in transit, but also in use. But that third one was, when I first heard that, was kind of new to me. I'm like, I get if it's being in transit, like from one system to the other, or if it's stored in a device somewhere or in the cloud somewhere, I get that. But actually in use, as you're working on it with your notebook computer or your phone, how can that get messed with in use? Because that's oftentimes when a good attacker can come in and start messing with that session and take it away from you and start stealing data, keystrokes, things like that. So that was something that was eye-opening in terms of what it means to do monitoring of data. And it's interesting to see organizations doing that more and more.
Oh, fascinating. And cultural issues in tech.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Yeah.
So are there cultural issues that are contributing to poor skills development or retention?
I think so. We all love innovation. We also want to get our business ahead, right? So you have to think very quickly. And the problem is that innovation, right? One of the typical things that Silicon Valley will do is it doesn't matter about the quality of the code. It's how innovative. Look how elegant it is. Look how cool it is. And that's a wonderful thing. But it is a notorious problem in Silicon Valley that they never review their code. And I've overstated that just to prove a point, that they don't evaluate code. They don't take as deep a look and do sanity checks on them as much as they should, because, hey, we're at the speed of innovation here. We're doing vibe innovation or vibe coding or whatever. That's a problem, because if you get sloppy at the beginning, you end up with a whole lot of slop at the end, garbage in, garbage out kind of thing, and you end up with some serious security issues. That attitude tends to get replicated from Silicon Valley into other sectors. And by sectors, I mean healthcare, banking. Banking, they're actually pretty buttoned down. They're smart enough to go, look, we have processes that we have to follow. But governments, shipping lately, shipping seems to be under a lot more attack lately. Mining, different sectors. All of them tend to get that problem. And again, it causes problems that you could argue that we've all heard of ransomware, right? We've all heard of supply chain attacks. You could argue that we all know what happens if you don't pay your debt off, right? You lose your car or lose your house. I always say, it's a terrible joke, but I love it. What happens when you play a country record backwards? Do you know what happens?
No idea.
You get your dog back, your house back, your wife back, right? But the problem is if you don't pay your debts back, you know what happens. You lose whatever it is. Well, you could argue that ransomware is simply a very nasty way of paying off a debt. The problem is you're not paying it off to the right person. You're paying it off to an attacker. And so those are some cultural issues that can get into an organization that need to be managed. And that's why we need creative kind of souls to think that through a little bit better. Because you can't solve the problem by just addressing the symptom. It's like, oh yeah, let's put a Band-Aid on that thing. It's like, well, maybe if you move your hand, that whirring thing wouldn't constantly cut that part of your hand, right? Root cause analysis. So many times organizations tend to have processes in place that worked 10 years ago that don't work now. But we don't realize that we need to make that cosmic shift or that thinking shift. Thomas Kuhn, he was a person who talked about scientific revolutions. He wrote a book on it. And he talked about these kind of right angle shifts of thinking. And he said too many times organizations, they think evolutionary rather than revolutionary. And sometimes it's time to rethink how you use your technology in a more revolutionary way.
That just sparked a bit of a geeky question. And I used to be an ex-developer many years ago. Wasn't very good. And I used to be a DBA, actually. So when you talked about databases, it just sparked off a few thoughts. And I was thinking about vibe coding you mentioned there. Yeah. Well, first of all, what is vibe coding, just for some of the listeners, if we're wondering what it is, and how does that differ to more traditional ways of development? And then the real question was, is vibe coding introducing more vulnerabilities, or like what should we watch out for there? Because being a traditional coder, I was very much in charge of the low level sort of code and the development. Vibe coding is almost this layer, abstract layer above, where I don't even have to care about the code really. As long as I get the outcome I need, that's what I care about. So could you just clarify a couple of those?
Couple of things. So first of all, the idea of vibe coding, when it was come up with the term, it was basically, he basically said, look, we're at the ideation phase right now, just kind of thinking about what we can create. And so I'll just use AI to say, hey, generate this feature, generate some code that does X, Y, and Z. Not worrying about the quality of the code because I'm thinking holistically about what it can be. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. That's fantastic. Right? What can become a problem, and what often is, oh, well then, because AI can generate that code, and it's really good code. Yeah, right. It's really good code. We don't need to do the checks. We don't even need good coders to go do it. We can just move right from the ideation phase into production. And see, that's the problem. It's a very seductive thing that's like, okay, we don't need to follow these expensive processes. And that term vibe coding kind of becomes misused from a good idea of like, look, we can ideate and actually create some prototypes. But my gosh, what makes you think that prototype would possibly be ready for prime time? But in this world, a lot of times we skip those steps, don't we? And we incur that technical debt. And that's a serious problem in thinking, because we want to disintermediate. There's another word, fancy word, disintermediation. It's a fancy way of saying eliminate the middle player or eliminate a barrier to entry. Just eliminate it. But you're not supposed to eliminate them necessarily. You're supposed to make them more efficient. But see, these days it's like, well, if AI can generate the code, what do we need these coders for? Or if AI can do this, what do we need these IT workers for? It becomes a very scary kind of thing. And what happens usually is organizations wake up from that dream and they go, okay, I get it. Vibe coding is great for prototyping. But then you take that code and then you have somebody who really knows what they're doing. The other thing about vibe coding I think is interesting is that's a way of describing what it means to work with AI, to create something. And usually our interaction with AI is very limited. Please create some code that does X, Y, and Z. Cool, copy and paste, boom. I call that the CAP model. It's not a good model. Best AI dialogue is a true Socratic dialogue. Socrates, where he'd sit down and he'd start asking you questions, you'd answer. And his idea is that as you engage in that dialectic, that dialogue, truth comes out. I would argue that if you have a good dialogue with AI or anybody else, you could end up with better stuff, better code, better cloud, better security. But it has to be a proper dialogue. So there has to be some sort of human still, I think, in the loop. So I think that vibe coding can be a great thing, but that term can just it's been misused. So now you can put vibe in front of everything. How about this? Vibe accounting. Let's see how well that works out when it comes time. In the United States, we have the IRS. And when the IRS comes and asks me some questions like, what's this stuff that you did in 2025, I'll just say, oh, I just did some vibe accounting. Don't worry about it. Yeah, let's see how well that works out. So
It reminds me of the term agile. Like agile, when it first came out, it was the cool thing for everyone to do. And then I started hearing all sorts of things like agile communication, agile HR, and
stick it in there.
it was just a thing to do, right? You just stick it in front of something, and it's cool.
Proper agile, project development, it takes an enormous amount of work to get right. And you can do some great things with it. Agile versus waterfall, types of development, things like that. But people need to realize there's really no free lunch here. There has to be some sort of adult in the room. And sometimes AI can be used as being that adult in the room. If developers are doing their work and AI can come in and say, actually, I see you guys skipping some steps. You really shouldn't do that. I'm going to have to inform your boss unless you do X, Y, Z correction. Hey, that's a cool use of AI. To me, that's kind of the idea of a guardrail. At least that's my idea of it. That's kind of groovy. What you don't need is AI going, oh, don't worry about that step. I'll come up with something. Because then you end up with what's called slop squatting. I don't want to get too geeky here, but slop squatting is, I'll start with a simple example. Of a friend of mine had a daughter she had ChatGPT write a paper. And the teacher said, hey, what are the resources? So she went back and asked ChatGPT, copied and pasted, and what are the resources there? And ChatGPT came up with like 3 websites that didn't exist. But they sure looked, but the URL was there, but you went to it and it was non-existent. Well, coders can do the same sorts of things. They can create code, and then the ChatGPT or the tool, whatever that tool is, will come up with fake repositories. And if I'm an attacker, what would I do if I discovered that there was a fake repository? Well, I'd go and create a real GitHub repository, put in the functionality that makes that library work supposedly, and then put in all sorts of groovy, fun things to steal your data. Right? That's called slop squatting. It's a form of typo squatting. But anyway, those are kind of the issues that we have to guard against. And I think it just comes down to a mature understanding of how tech can be used. And if anybody wants to get a job, they need to prove that through certification. They need to prove that through getting hands-on muscle memory kind of skills. But they also need to prove that they can solve those kinds of problems, that they're aware of them.
And I think that critical thinking is sort of disappearing a little bit because
can be.
Yeah, I came across a recent bit of research from MIT, and they took 3 groups of people, gave them a task to write an essay. One group was told to use Google, one group was told to use AI, the other one was told not to use anything and just use good old-fashioned human skills. And they looked at their kind of brain activity and all of that good stuff, and then they also checked how much of the essay they could recall afterwards, how they felt about what they'd written. The sort of results are kind of predictable in a way. The group that used AI was very much disengaged. They didn't feel like that writing was theirs.
So they weren't invested in it.
Yeah, and actually their brain activity was the least because they didn't really use much of their own brain power. Obviously, not having any tools and capability and just using good old-fashioned skills, human skills, sort of sparked the most amount of brain activity. But there's a bigger issue here because some of the psychologists in the world, they're looking at this and they were talking about, well, this could increase our risk of dementia and all of these things because because we apparently, having good cognitive load on our brains is healthy for us in the long term. So are we heading in a downward spiral with all these AI tools, do you think? Or?
It's funny. I like to think that some organizations will really understand that they don't want to have an institutional dementia begun by the improper use of any tool, whether it be AI or whatever. And that they'll basically say, look, we're going to leverage AI in the ways that it's useful. And I think organizations that take a more mature way of understanding it will be the ones that will win out at the end of the day. Some might get lucky, some might do well at the beginning, and then suddenly we realize, oh, there's no emperor. The emperor has no clothes there. I think the best ones are the ones that truly interact with AI. In fact, we did some research at CompTIA, and we asked, what are the biggest issues that you have? And organizations are like, we're struggling is the wrong word, but we're very interested in finding the best way to interact with AI. And I think it starts like there are about 4 different ways we interact with AI right now: to do research, discovery, We use agents to do that. There's the second one, right? There's co-piloting, which is the idea of it. There's a 1 hour presentation that was given. I don't have an hour, so I want to read the summary of it.
Yeah.
So it's those kinds of things. And then of course there's productive. Hey, create some code for me. So there's the 4 different kind of interactive modes. But I think it's the idea of, are you just copying and pasting? Are you just kind of accepting this, whatever you're getting from the AI oracle as truth? I mean, that's a bit of a problem. We can, no, you have to have a healthy skepticism, not a cynicism, but a healthy skepticism. Like, okay, where would you get that from? Just like you would in any good coworker. It's like, well, I can trust Paddy can trust James, but at some point there's always a healthy skepticism. Like, okay, look, you posited this. Let's see if that really holds water. Ask. Just because it came from AI doesn't mean it's right. Just because it came from AI doesn't mean it's wrong either. See, and this is right now where we need workers that kind of have that unique skill. And I think it really comes down to the ability to have the foundations. The foundational understanding of how AI works and doesn't, the foundations of tech. Do you know what a MAC address is and DNS and all these things, so that you can speak in a literate way. Recently, I was showing how ChatGPT can analyze a packet capture. I took a packet capture and I just uploaded it, and I started asking it a bunch of questions about the packet capture, and it was kind of fun. I had embedded sensitive information in a bunch of ICMP packets. Just ping packets, who cares? But I had put password information inside of that from a database. And I was able to get that out past the firewall. And I was showing this to how I could do that with security analysts. And they were like, oh, this is cool. Well, the CEO was sitting there and he goes, well, wait a minute, if ChatGPT does this stuff, what do I need these expensive people for? Actually, he said that, and it was kind of jokingly. And I said, well, tell you what, sit down. And I had the person sit down, the CEO sit down in front of the computer. And I said, well, ChatGPT does it, automatically. And he goes, well, okay, great. And he goes, well, then he kind of looks at it and he goes, well, what do I do now? I said, well, just ask ChatGPT to look for stuff. He goes, well, what questions do I ask? And I said, ask them. So, and it was, you can see they're all kind of like, thank goodness we'll keep our jobs for a little while. But AI brings tremendous efficiencies and it does some really cool things, but it has to be done right. And that's the hard lesson people are learning right now.
Yeah, I think that's so important. The fact that having some foundational knowledge in something, whether it's programming or as you mentioned, even the cybersecurity side of things is so fundamental, because then you can ask sensible questions, right? It reminds me of my days as a business analyst, and the whole job was about asking good questions. And if you're just going to turn around to a stakeholder and say, what are your requirements, and just be a scribe, well, why am I needed? And so I think having that foundational level of knowledge is really important. And I think even though AI's got a lot of the answers, it is still a case of us doing a bit of hard work to learn stuff as well, rather than sort of becoming lazy, which I find all the time. Like I'm forever, doing that, where I, like you say, that mode of summarizing information. I can't be bothered to read a big article. I'll be like, just give me the 5 big points in this article, and but that's not doing me any good, really. I should be sort of maybe spending a bit more effort and using a bit more brain power, I think.
Well, I think what's really cool about it is that I'm definitely a believer that AI can be used cynically. We saw years ago there was some company, they laid off like 10,000 workers, and their answer at the time was, well, because AI. And it was so fundamentally, I think they were making things up. And we're seeing a lot of that. There's a lot of organizations that are running leaner right now, economically and things like that. But I've noticed over the last year, they're not saying because AI anymore. They're just saying, look, we just have to right size for various reasons, things like that. So AI can become a distraction. But I think the main thing that I think, to your point about having the right foundation so that you can ask the right questions, AI can help you get to those questions sooner. I'm not sure that it acts as a complete replacement for the human being there. Some human beings, a web script can replace, for gosh sakes, because they don't contribute much. But I think that's a common issue. I'm trying to say you don't need AI to replace certain humans. You don't need anything sometimes. But by and large, if people are looking to contribute, it's because they have the ability as a business analyst, for example, to ask those right questions because you had experience that allowed you to do that, right? And it's that lateral thought that AI still struggles with because it's not truly intelligent. Remember, it plays language games, it plays numbers games, and it tends to be very good. A lot of those results are excellent. But I think when it comes to really running a business, and you're now talking about a high stakes kind of set of decisions, AI can act as a guardrail. It doesn't act as the driver yet. I don't think AGI is probably AGI. Where AI truly becomes sentient. A lot of people are saying it's coming faster than we think. I don't know enough about it to say to give you a date or whatever. But I do think that if you have the right foundations, if you have curiosity, and that's the number one skill that people will come up with. The ability to ask questions, curiosity is the number one skill that most C-level people will say they look for in a worker. Then I think you can break into this profession still.
Imagine I'm a CEO of a product-led organization.
Yeah.
So profits are important.
Right.
I've got pressures from my shareholders. Is speed more important or safety? If you had to prioritize one over the other.
I have to say that a lot of organizations prioritize speed over safety. They'll never say that, but that's the end result oftentimes is that. It shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way.
Why shouldn't it be that way?
Because it creates, basically, they think that they're creating an efficiency and it's a false efficiency. If you're skipping those steps, it creates a false efficiency. It feels good at first. I'm a diver. I used to be anyway, a scuba diver a lot. I used to scuba dive every week faithfully. In fact, I one time ended up diving the same place where Linus Torvalds, the guy who invented Linux, was diving. Nice guy. And when you go diving, you incur an obligation. It's an obligation. If you go down of any depth at all, as you're going down to 40 feet, 60 feet, if you come up too fast, you'll end up, you can get something called the bends, decompression sickness, because there's an obligation that you incur and you have to pay off that obligation. And it may feel good to just go, oh yeah, just come up and I don't need to waste my time doing the safety stops on the way up, but you can end up being seriously hurt or worse from that. Organizations that prioritize speed that way, and they will never outwardly say that they do it, and they will even say, well, no, we would never, intend to harm people or intend to skip steps or whatever, but they tend to do, and it tends to happen. It's kind of like a scope creep, and that's why they end up in these situations where there's code, there's unencrypted. I know one company, a very, very large company based out of Seattle that works in the cloud. I'll just say that. Their development teams around the world will have basically about the same 5 or 6. They keep reconstituting or keep repeating the same 5 or 6 issues that have to do with using the same keys, encryption keys in multiple resources, or not encrypting things at all, or having storage that's open to public. It keeps happening time and time again. Well, why is that? It's because speed pressure. Hey, you got to have that stuff done right away. And if you don't, your KPI, you'll be gone. You'll be replaced. It's figuring out the root cause of that. What is the root cause of that? Speed is one thing, but haste is another. And I think a lot of people mistake speed for haste.
That reminds me of an example where I used to work for an investment bank, and we were trying to speed up the software development lifecycle and to try and get more value quicker to our end users. And some teams were doing it really well in 1 week, 2 week sprints.
Cool.
Others were struggling 6 months to a year. And this one leader had this vision, and he said, I would like us to be able to take an idea into production safely in a day. And he used this word safely, which was
That's
genius.
Yeah, I like that.
And everybody said, it can't be done. We're a big bank. We've never delivered things that quickly before. It just can't be done. Well, what's really interesting, we did eventually have a process that enabled us to do this, but there were so many safeguards, so many guardrails And it wasn't about, if I dream up an idea of a whole new app in the morning and by the evening it's going to be fully deployed. No.
Vibe coding gone wild. Yeah.
This is way before all the AI kind of boom. And really it was about, well, even if it's a small feature, like how do I get that out there to my users quickly? But even to do a simple change, we had a whole criteria we had to follow. And it was very much about kind of the governance, the safety, making sure if we're going to trust you to do this, you've got a good track record. So we would look at each team on a case-by-case basis, and they would have to fulfill this criteria. Things like your track record of defects must be within this tolerance. Your track record of, I guess, incidents, live incidents, all of this good stuff must be within a certain threshold. Actually ruled out about 80% of our teams because they just didn't have a good track record. And it was this phenomenon that people were so focused on speed that they were churning out stuff really fast, but actually they just weren't doing it safely. And so to safeguard the platforms, the health of the products, we made sure that we ruled those teams out, and it was only until they could prove themselves that they could make use of this.
So it's really cool. So it's a trust model like that.
Yeah.
And so with any form of automation, and I see automation, AI as, if there's a circle of automation, AI is in that. You could see how AI could be used to speed up those processes in a very, very positive way. So I think that could be done. You just can't unhook the safety protocols or the regulatory protocols. And it's interesting you bring up your example of the finance space, because usually in the finance space, they're far more mature than most other sectors. There are other sectors. I know some folks in retail that absolutely rival, maybe even better than, believe it or not, in retail, they do very well, because both entities really don't like the idea of losing money, and they really don't like the idea of having unhappy customers. More than the average bear. And so it's interesting that it's those processes that I see being made more efficient. And AI can do that. And we've seen it happen as long as you're not unhooking things.
So I'm going to take you back to training, because I think for me, it's always really interesting when we speak to clients about their learning requirements.
Sure.
We're all very focused on our own area. So clients will come to me with a very specific problem, and it's sometimes difficult to see the wider picture, the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So if you could redesign how organizations approach cybersecurity training from the ground up, like what would you change? What are some of the recommendations?
I would think in terms of the business, and I would think of cybersecurity as not something that's just specific to information security, like security analytics or security analytics or pen testing, but to understanding the layers that are involved here. And by layers, I mean applications, how they're used, their business use. I would look in terms of the layer of data. That's a very important layer. So we tend to think as techies, we tend to think of the OSIRM, the 7-layer model and all that, from the hardware up to the application layer. But I'm thinking in terms of layers, like, okay, where's our applications? How are they working? Where's the data working? Also, the business processes, the workflows themselves. I would focus on those areas. From an education perspective. That's why, for example, I think understanding we have an essentials series at CompTIA that basically focuses on understanding the essentials of AI, or the essentials of project management, the essentials of business. Technology is now everywhere. It can't be avoided. So let's make sure that all of our end users understand their place and their relationship and how they use technology better. So that's one thing. I think also from an education perspective to solve the problem, don't look at it just as a security problem, but as a technology implementation problem. Then you can solve that. And you could look at it. So if you look at it as something that it's a layered problem rather than some sort of security problem, it makes the investigation far more rich and suggestive. And you can then map training to that problem much easier.
Oh, fantastic. Well, what's something exciting that's happening at CompTIA right now? And that you'd love people to know about?
Sure. We've got so many cool things happening. We have our new AI Essentials course. We have a whole series of Essentials courses, but the AI Essentials one, the new one, I'm really excited about because it does a great job of what it means, explaining what it means to properly interact with AI. We're also coming out, we have some great refreshes having to do with our help desk cert, help desk as a profession, alive and well. It has not, been replaced by AI. It's involved in AI in a big way. And so it's interesting to see that. We have refreshes in Data Plus. We also have some new products coming up. Linux Plus, we have updates that it's really neat to see Linux Plus become more automation and AI aware. That's really cool to see. We're also for next year coming out with something called Sec AI Plus, and that's going to be really fun. Not only how to protect AI implementations. So here are the ways in which people seem to be going after AI right now, going after the data, going after the LLMs, going after the cloud presence. So I've been looking through the labs of that, and that's so cool to see it because I get to stand on the shoulders of giants and go, okay, thousands of subject matter experts said this is important, and then we have really bright people who come up with the labs, and then I'm able to kind of kibitz on that and have some fun with it. So that's really cool. We're also doing a Sec OT Plus cert that's coming up, and that's going to be really interesting because operational technology it's been very interesting to me. Just to understanding shipping, for example, that uses operational technology. We all go to our ATMs and get our money out. That's operational technology. So that's an area that I think is going to be really fun to look into. So there's a few things that we've got at CompTIA. We also more and more with our labs, we're making them much more scalable, much more, how should I put this, part of the learning experience. So instead of just saying, here's a lab to use ChatGPT, we're actually using ChatGPT to do grading of your interaction with itself. How well did you interact with that? Just, did you just copy and paste it, or did you start, oh, I need to ask about this little area here. Can you explain where you came to that conclusion? How could you improve it? So, and then you get a grade that AI does for it. So I think that's really fun to see how we can tame AI and make people more useful with AI, but also how we can leverage AI in creative ways. So that's really fun stuff too.
Oh, wow. They're certainly keeping you busy. And
they're keeping the people busy who are doing it. I'm just lucky enough to be brought in at certain stages and to see it and do sanity checks and things like that. And that's a fun part of my job. I love that.
Oh, James, time's flown by, and it's been such a fascinating conversation. I've certainly learned a lot. I'll be taking lots of insights away for myself. Make sure my daughter listens to this as well. There are folks that if you want, I can put you in touch with, if she's really interested, she could talk to people at C-level or people who work every day at the level. She could ask them all sorts of questions. Be happy to help. Oh, wow. That's amazing. Look at that. Selfishly, I've got some great value for myself. Sorry, folks. It's not about you. It's all about me. No, I'm only kidding. Well, James, thank you so much. I'm so glad we caught you whilst you were here in the UK so we could do this face to face. Thank you once again.
Anytime.